In this video, I'm going to show you how to paint Ultramarines. I've had a bunch of you request this one, so I figured it's about time to give the boys in blue some sponge treatment. I'll go over how I paint the armor, shade it, add highlights, and deal with sub-assemblies like the red helmet. I've painted Ultramarines in the past using an airbrush, but I wanted to see how well it holds up with the sponge, and how close I can get it to match the airbrushed version. Anyway, let's get into it. Starting off, the sergeant's primed black and broken up into sub-assemblies to make painting easier. Normally I skip sub-assembly, I like seeing everything come together as I go, but this time it made sense. The helmet's red, so painting it separately is easier, and his bolt rifle blocks some of the chest, which makes it tricky to reach with the sponge. Before painting, I dampen the sponge and squeeze out most of the water, so it's just slightly damp. That little bit of moisture helps thin the paint inside the sponge. I start with a base coat of King Purple. I pick some up with the sponge, then blot most of it off on a paper towel to avoid bubbles or too much paint buildup. I sponge that across the whole model. For any hard to reach spots, I just use a brush instead. Next, I'll start building up that cobalt blue Ultramarines are known for. I'm using a paint called Ultramarine here, pretty fitting honestly. And I'll mix this one to one with King Purple to start building up that classic blue. I'm sponging it on with broad passes, just layering it over the base coat. Then I gradually add more Ultramarine into the mix and go again. I don't rinse the sponge between layers, the colours just blend in the sponge as I go. Once that's built up, I rinse the sponge properly and switch to Ultramarine on its own. I apply this as another broad pass, covering most of the model while letting some of the previous darker layers show through in the recesses. Next I'll add some shading. I've rinsed out the sponge and like before it's slightly damp, but this time with a bit more water than when I was base coating. That extra moisture helps thin the King Purple into more of a transparent glaze. I dab this into a few spots like under the arms and sides of the legs. That purple shade really complements the ultramarine blue, and you'll see that same tone used in a lot of the official box art. The idea here is to selectively tint some areas on the armor, mainly spots where shadows would naturally fall. I'm not trying to cover everything, just shift the blue slightly toward purple to deepen the tone. That little bit of purple acts like a shadow pass. It keeps the color variation interesting and makes the armor look a bit richer overall. Now I'll give the armor a quick dry brush. I mix ultramarine and ducat blue at a 1:1 ratio. I wipe most of the paint off on a tissue, then lightly dry brush it onto the raised areas, just catching the edges. I avoid flat surfaces and keep it subtle. Now I'll grab a size 2 brush. I base coat the black areas using Tenebros Grey, and for the leathers, I use Whole Red. And just a quick one, Golden Maple sent me a set of brushes to try out, and I've been using them across this project and a few others. Honestly, they've held up really well, no splitting, no fluffing out, and they've been solid for everything from dry brushing to crispy edge highlights. They perform just as well as my usual sable brushes, so if you want to give them a go, there's a link in the description. Use the code SWARM at checkout for 10% off, and it helps support the channel too. The gun is also done with Tenebros Grey, and then I give it a quick dry brush of pale grey to catch the edges. For the red helmet, I start by mixing a bit of Tenebros Grey into Mephiston Red to help it cover the black. Then I add another layer using just Mephiston Red on its own. Next, I mix Mephiston Red and Scarlet Red 1:1 and apply that over most of the flat surfaces. Then I use Scarlet Red on its own, focusing that toward the front of the helmet, creating a soft zenithal highlight. I also thin down some scarlet red and brush it over a few sections facing upwards, like the lip on the side of the helmet, to warm up the transition and tie the layers together. Then I edge highlight with scarlet red to help the helmet's silhouette stand out a bit more and sharpen things up. For any gold areas and trim, I use Balthazar gold, and gunmetal for any silvers. If I get any spillover onto the blue, I just mix up a bit of King Purple and Ultramarine and touch it up. Doesn't need to be exact. The wash later will hide most of it. Time to wash this blue boy. First I coat it in white spirit using a dropper bottle, but you can also use a brush here, whatever's easiest. Then I go straight in with a black enamel wash while the surface is still wet. While the wash is still wet, I add in a bit of dark rust wash in a few spots to add warmth. Once the model looks dry on the flat surfaces, but is still wet in the recesses, I move on. I grab a clean sponge. One side gets soaked in white spirit. I use that to gently remove the wash from raised areas. The other side is dry, so I can push the pigment around if I need to. I also leave a lot of the black wash on the leather, because I like the darker, more worn effect it gives. And in case you're wondering, no, I don't seal the model with a gloss varnish first. White spirit and enamel washes won't chemically strip acrylic paint. The only time paint comes off is if the model hasn't been primed properly, like if you skip the primer or used one that doesn't give the paint something to stick to, or if you're using too much pressure when cleaning off the wash. That's why I use a makeup sponge here. Light pressure, no abrasion. In fact, this is what I originally used the makeup sponge for, long before I started using it to paint with. It was just for cleaning off enamel washes without damaging the paint underneath. Now I'll move on to the green lenses. I base coat the lenses white. Then I thin down some laser yellow, which is more of a yellow-green, and paint that over the top. Next I use green skin punch thinned down more like a glaze, and apply it around the lens edges. I let a bit of that spill onto the helmet, just enough to hint at a soft glow. To add more definition to the helmet, I edge highlight some of the edges with pastel peach. Then I thin down some scarlet red into a glaze and brush that over the highlights to tie everything together. At this point, I compared the marine to the one I airbrushed to see if the blue was similar, and I noticed the blue was darker, so to further brighten it, I clean out the sponge and mix Ducat blue with ultramarine at a 1:1 ratio. I blot most of it out onto a tissue, and using gentle pressure, I dab it lightly over the top-facing panels. This gives the blue some extra volume. Then I go in with a size 1 brush, and use the same mix for edge highlights, not all edges, just the ones that are most pronounced. At this point, I've also added decals. If you want to see how I do that, I've got a free tutorial on my Patreon. You can check it out by signing up as a free member. Leather gets a quick highlight with mahogany brown, but I still leave most of the black wash showing, keeping that gritty look. Then I glue everything together to see how it's all looking. And I decided the armour was looking way too clean, so I added some battle damage. I painted on some thin lines of Ducat blue for scratches, then a bit of Tenebrose grey on the top edge to give them some depth. For varnish, I mix about 70% ultramatte with 30% satin and run it through the airbrush. You can brush it on too. I do that in the Dark Angels video if you want to check that out. Adjust the mix to get the finish you like. Doesn't have to be exact. This mix keeps everything looking natural while still protecting the paint. It gives you a finish that's not too shiny and not too flat. You can also re-highlight the metallics, either with a bit of silver or just reapply Balthazar Gold to restore the shine after varnishing. And that's the Ultramarine Sergeant done. Thanks for watching, hope this one was helpful. Big thanks to all my Patreons who help support the channel and keep these videos coming. There are more guides over on Patreon if you want to check those out, and if you haven't already, chuck us a like and subscribe, it all helps a lot. Catch you in the next one.